a time to every purpose under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. He walked with us, hand in hand, just yesterday. And today, he's not here. He challenged us. He joked with us. He worked to bring out the best in us. He argued with us. He inspired us. And he loved us. And today, he's not here. My sister Susan moved to Chapel Hill in 1986, just a few years after Richard. And they met in the music department mailroom on Susan's second day of school. Ah, the mailroom. First, a friendship. After all, colleagues for life don't want to risk messing that up. But some things are too good to keep under wraps for too long. Richard said, let's move in together. Susan said, I don't think so. Not until we're married. Richard said, then let's buy a house. Susan said, no way, not unless we're married. Richard said, okay, if we find a house we like, we'll get married. And Susan said, I'll call the realtor. By June, we were all treated to a beautiful ceremony under the weeping willows alongside the old lake in Connecticut. Susan, it was such good fortune that you and Richard had each other. He was such a gift to you, and your love meant the whole world to him. Your music making together was legendary. You two will always be a beautiful model for me of caring, devotion, understanding, and love. Richard was endlessly caring and committed to his sister Ellen, to his mother Miriam, with blessed memory, and to his father, Robert, who mourns with us today. Bob, my heart's with you, today and every day. Richard was a shining star in your universe and in ours. To Nicholas, Richard and Susan's only son, I can only say, Nick, your dad loved you with all his heart, and he devoted himself fully to imparting to you confidence to trust your own heart and your own mind. I never saw Richard's face beam as it did whenever you would play piano. For me, as you surely know, you're the best gift Richard could ever have given me. Richard was never afraid to go for it. He was a little enigmatic and certainly complex. He was ambitious, dedicated, hardworking, musically brilliant, deeply caring, funny as all can be, and far less neurotic than most, at least among most people I've ever known. He had an artist's sensibility and great discipline. Vacations were a time to explore new places, to be with family, maybe away from school responsibilities, but never away from practicing. The violin followed him everywhere. And Richard was always real, never pretending to be somebody else or something else. He was always, always genuine. Full of life only begins to describe Richard. He has on his music stand Alan Anderson's Ice Blink. On Saturday, he came home with a brand new all-electric car. Yesterday, a case of fine wine from Zagat arrived, apparently ordered sometime before. Just this morning, a box of gourmet dog food arrived. Apparently the first in a series of monthly treats he ordered for his beloved brisket. Classic Richard. As many, many, many of you know firsthand, Richard was a once-in-a-lifetime teacher. I'd like to read a note that Susan received from Ed Parmentier, who's a harpsichordist and professor of music at the University of Michigan. Ed writes, Richard was a kind, patient person. He was the excellent listener I always strive to be. Musically, he changed my life. I will never forget our work on the early Italian violin repertoire. He went crazy, absolutely nuts with this music. He taught me without even thinking he was teaching. He taught me about probing the extremes in performance. Playing with Richard was like jumping into a snazzy sports car and hanging on for the ride. He was a musical dynamo. I look out and I see an ocean of lives here with us today. Faces with eyes sparkling, some young, some old. I feel this wonderful old hall, baffles and all, thank you, Richard. A hall that Richard and his students have filled so many times with the most beautiful playing imaginable, now filled with friends and family, colleagues and students. And I know by being here together, we begin to honor Richard. For it's in our eyes and in our hands, in our music and in our lives and in our hearts, that we truly honor Richard's memory. And that's where his spirit will live on forever. I'd like to welcome Mark Cass, Professor and Chair of the Music Department, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to thank Lee Perutka for her beautiful Bach playing today. I'm sure Richard would have loved to hear that. Among many other things, Richard was the Associate Chair for Performance, Composition, and Music Education here at the Department of Music. I had the pleasure of working with him very closely in that capacity. We met at least once a week and kept in constant contact through emails and phone calls. Richard was a wonderful colleague, and I valued his counsel and support. He would often send me little notes of encouragement after a faculty meeting that I'd run. He would write, "Well done," or "Excellent meeting, Mark." Those notes meant a lot to me. I wish I could ask him what he thinks of this event. Actually, here's what I imagine. Before saying what he thinks, before saying anything, he'd make that pained grimace and tilt his head, which signaled an inner debate on how to respond. And then I'd imagine him saying something like, "Very nice, but a bit heavy, wouldn't you agree?" He had that habit of adding, "Wouldn't you agree?" or "Wouldn't you say so?" to the end of statements that wouldn't necessarily provoke unanimity. I'll really miss that. Richard was a superb violinist, a thoughtful colleague, a quick-witted and well-read intellectual, and a fine human being. But above all else, we here in the department will remember him as a dedicated teacher. We will hear one of his students speak in a moment, but I'd like to share two brief tributes from those who had studied with him. The first is from current student Ning Lee. She wrote, "Dr. Luby was the first person I met when I flew 10,000 miles from Singapore to UNC as a freshman. He personally came to the airport to pick me up. In addition to being a completely committed, generous, and enthusiastic violin teacher, he was also very invested in our personal growth as young adults in college. I remember thoroughly enjoying conversations with him and learning about his perspectives on all sorts of things, from Bach to religion to the stock markets to why he loved to perform and teach. He always went the extra mile to help his students out. When I was struggling with my left hand disorder, he brought me to doctors and musicians all over North Carolina to seek treatment. He brought me books to read and experimented with so many different ways of teaching to try to help me. His kindness extended beyond musical pursuits. I recall junior year when my laptop was stolen. He lent me his very own for close to a month. The musician and person I am today would be very different if not for his guidance as a professor, his compassion as a mentor, and his integrity as a friend." The second tribute is from alumnus Daniel Colston, who wrote, "I was one of those students that he'd have come back for an extra lesson here or there. We all were. He did that for everyone. He was so generous with his time. I always suspected that he had much better things to do than hear me again that week, but he just cared so genuinely about everyone. He wanted to be there. The gift of his time and effort has truly been one of the most inspirational things in my life. I went to UNC not knowing what I wanted to major in or do for a career, but I ended up leaving as a music major, thanks mostly to him. I went on to graduate school and just began my first year of teaching at a college, which became my goal after meeting Dr. Luby. Now I see students much like me, not knowing what they're going to do with their lives. I try every day to give them just as much time and effort as he gave me, in the hopes that one day, one of these students might just get inspired too." Richard's students meant the world to him, and clearly the feeling was mutual. We can take some comfort, then, in knowing that he will live on in the lives of his many, many students. People have asked how they can help honor Richard's memory. There are many ways, but one way we can do this is by continuing his good work on behalf of students. So I'm pleased to announce that we have just established the Professor Richard Luby Memorial Fund that will be used to attract and support the very best student musicians. His colleagues here, most important among them, his wife Susan, believe that helping students is a fitting way to ensure his legacy. I have to think that Richard would agree. Thank you.
Here from Terry Rose, our dear friend and colleague, Senior Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jack. I come before you today in my formal capacity as Senior Associate Dean of Fine Arts and Humanities, speaking for the college and the university, and acknowledging the outstanding career of Professor Richard Luby. Holding the Doctor of Musical Arts from Yale, a Master of Music from Juilliard, and the Bachelor of Music from Curtis, Richard was hired here at Carolina in 1979. Through the past 34 years, he brought extraordinary recognition to the university as a performer and as a teacher, in a career which extended from Baroque and classical music on historical instruments through the newest repertoire for modern violin. Richard performed nationally and internationally to widespread acclaim as a soloist, conductor soloist, and collaborative musician. He dedicated himself to establishing a prestigious string program embedded in a rigorous liberal arts environment, mentoring and guiding countless successful students. Richard also served as a strong and effective leader in the Department of Music, as you've heard, especially in his role as Associate Chair for these past 6 years. Today we recognize and honor Professor Richard Luby, an extraordinary faculty member, colleague, and friend to all those within the Department of Music, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and throughout the profession. I also come before you today as a colleague and friend of Richard's and Susan's and Nick's, of Richard's for almost 30 years, and would like to honor him from that perspective as well. Richard touched us in so many ways, with his towering musical talents, his astounding intellect, his wicked wit, and irrepressible sense of humor, including a prodigious panoply of puns, and his generosity of spirit. As a concert goer, you may be remembering Richard from Ensemble Courant in the 1980s, or perhaps his distinctive solo Bach lecture performances in historic Playmakers Theater just a year ago. He consistently delivered provocative performances with that individual stamp of music making. As a student, you were likely challenged by Professor Luby to imagine and create different phrasings in your Paganini Caprice, or to listen and interact with your chamber music colleagues in the Brahms Sextet. He always called upon you to realize your fullest potential. As a colleague, you will certainly have admired Richard's dedicated and passionate service and commitment to this department. He was at the bedrock of the program, and we thank him for that. In your mind's eye right now, you might be envisioning Richard's roguish grin, his boundless energy, that brilliant personality. Richard Luby was larger than life, an inimitable, vibrant, and charismatic presence. Our beloved Richard taught and inspired so many of us. He created an important legacy which will live on for years to come.
To say that Richard's colleagues and Susan's colleagues are just colleagues doesn't begin to capture the depth of the relationships that Susan and Richard had. Brent Wissick, Professor of Music, personifies that friendship and that collegiality as well as better than it.
I will do my best to hold myself together right now. Richard was not only my closest colleague, but my dearest friend here in the faculty for over 30 years. For the last 10 years, our offices were across the hall from each other, and it was very easy to have instant conferences, and we had several a day. Cello students who've been in the office with me will know, of course, there was a knock that we always knew was Dr. Luby. It was in the style of Richard. It was fast and excited. So when I heard, it was Richard on the door. He needed to talk about something right then, or make an appointment to talk about it. And so we literally communicated daily. And there were often phone calls or emails on the weekends when we weren't in the office at the same time. So for the past 10 years, we had the geography of being next to each other. But I think back with even more laughter and profound sadness to our early time here together 20 and 30 years ago. you now remember, Richard came in 79, I came here in 82, and Richard was 10 years older than I am, so he was not only a colleague and a friend, he was a mentor to me in my early years here. He was farther along in his performance career, and let me just say, the people that Richard has introduced me to through the decades have transformed my life and career. What can I say? Richard knew so many people all over the world. I'm getting emails now from people in Mexico and in Europe who are saying, please convey to Susan and the family our profound sadness. And those people were changed by him. Richard also was already an astonishing and experienced teacher back in the 1980s when I was a young professor trying to figure out what I was going to do. And he was a mentor to me in teaching. Many of us who watched him teach back then were amazed by his know-how and his intuitions as young as he was. And I'm seeing students now who have gray hair who have come back to be with us today that he taught back then. He was amazing when he was a young guy. He didn't have the maturity of later life wisdom that he acquired as well. But he was already an amazing teacher, and I learned from that and watched that. It's already been mentioned that Ensemble Quran was founded back in the 1980s, the group that Richard and I supposedly co-founded. But just like the purple battens in this room, let there be no mistake, Richard's vision and determination and energy started Ensemble Quran. There was no stopping him when he had a vision of something to do. On another side of it, Richard, of course, was also a personal friend, not only a colleague. We were on committees together, and we fought, and we could argue over things. And a lot of people in this room know that an argument with Richard was intense. But you never felt that he was intractable. You could always have a discussion in which you were both changed. And you never left the room feeling like your friendship was in a difficult situation. You always knew you were, at the end, something that was right for the university or the department or the students was going to come out of it. He and I just had a little, let's say, disagreement this past Saturday at violin auditions for the high school seniors coming in. And between students, we had a little argument about things. We solved it, and it was over, and things were better. Back in the 1980s, of course, Susan, in the early 80s when I first got here, Susan wasn't here yet, as you've heard mentioned. And I was around Richard some when he was looking for the one in his life and went on a lot of double dates with him. And let me just say, I spent hours a day with Richard in the 1980s, rehearsing, or team teaching, or on committee meetings. We did go out later and have a beer and talk, and sometimes double dated, and I met a lot of the interesting women that he was exploring to see whether they should be the one to do it. But if Susan will allow me to tell this story. When Susan came and interviewed for this position in March of '86, Richard was having a busy week. He was having a Richard week where something was going on. So he wasn't at a lot of the interviews. I don't think he was at any of the interview sessions. He didn't see you until that mailroom day. But let me just say this. When I saw this talented and beautiful and interesting young woman, I said, this could be the one. And Susan knows that when she and I and Ruth went out to lunch in the summer when you can't look for a place to live, and we said, there is someone on the faculty who we think is going to find you very interesting. And watch out. It was the mailroom, wasn't it? And then those incredible months of them discovering that they were the ones for each other. Oh my God. And our young families watched babies be born together, and you know, Richard held my kids, and I held Nick as a little one. And we were together through the stressful years in a young academic's life of promotion and tenure. Let's just say we were all with each other the nights before those decisions were made, and in a sense held each other's hands through it. And then we were able to celebrate those things later. And we celebrated great concerts in New York and great reviews and not so great reviews, and we got through it all. And I'm forever changed by Richard, totally for the good. I mentioned, and it's the bats in here have been mentioned, this all came out of a fairly recent experience. 2 or 3 years ago, Richard and I were here with Andrew Willis, recording the Chopin Piano Trio in January, in a cold January, and the recording engineer who came in from New England happened to be very interested in Hill Hall and had some ideas on how it could be improved. And Richard only needed to hear those ideas for about 5 minutes, and we now have these purple bats. He was determined to do it. But also related to that session, I have great joy and great sadness. That recording is going to come out this spring on a label. And Richard plays beautifully on it. And I wanted to celebrate that, the release of that recording so much. So now we'll just have to listen to it because he plays beautifully. So thank you, friends, for being here. Thank you, Richard, for being one of the most important people in my life.
Thank you. Robert Garbaz, a sophomore violin major, a student of Richard's, will say a few words.
Again, my name is Robert. I studied with Dr. Luby here for about 2 years now. And when they asked me to speak here today, I tried to think of a story or two that I could tell that would kind of summarize what happened with him in the past couple years that I learned, or things that he did for all of us. And so throughout the week, we've obviously been together with the studio, and we've been talking and sharing stories, and I've just been trying to remember 1 or 2 of them. And, you know, everybody has similar ones of things about lessons, funny little things he'd say or do during a lesson, or getting out of the lesson just feeling like you have no idea what you're doing. But after I just tried to think of all of I couldn't come up with a single anecdote that I really think describes all that he did for us and all that he meant to us. But there were certainly things that stood out when we discussed our memories with him. I think all of us that have ever had a lesson with him can agree that the word intense is a good word to describe a lesson. Every time you were in a lesson, it seemed like it would be the last one ever. He insisted that you got everything. And you never really understood at the time why he just made sure you got this thing. And there was no such thing as, oh, we'll cover that next time, or we'll get to it later. He insisted that it was just right. And he had goals, and sometimes they seemed a little bit out of your reach, but he always knew that you could do it. And another thing is that he never could just sit there in a lesson. He tried to listen and just sit, but he would have to always stand up and grab his violin and play along with you with an accompaniment that I don't know where he came up with it, but it always made sense. And sometimes it was just that. It was just him playing along with you. He didn't even need to tell you what to fix. Just his playing, his example would be enough to show you exactly what you needed to do. And that's kind of why I'm here today. My first lesson with him, I was kind of reluctant to go to. I had already pretty much decided on going to Indiana University, but my old teacher insisted that I come here and meet him. And so I came and played Bach for him, and I think Mozart. And after an hour lesson with him, I felt like I had accomplished more in that 1 hour than I had in all my other hours of practice or anything else that I'd ever had before. And so by the end of it, I knew, you know, I really need to consider coming here. And if I had any doubt at the very end of the lesson, he very blatantly said, "You're not going to Indiana, you're coming here and studying." And, you know, over the years, lessons never really changed much. It was always the same high energy, getting everything done lesson. But what did change is that you really got to know him better, to a point where he wouldn't have to really say much. Sometimes you would stop playing and he'd look at you, and it only took a smile, just one smile that he could do, and you knew exactly what he had to say, and he would do it again, and he would do it right the next time. And I'd actually just seen him on Monday for a lesson, and I mean, he was in a particularly good mood that day. I remember it reminded me a lot of my first lesson with him. I felt coming in that I didn't really know much about the music that I was playing. I didn't really feel ready for the lesson. But by the end of it, so much was accomplished in that 1 hour. So I was really glad to have that great lesson on Monday. The other thing that I think really stood out when we were talking this week was just how infectious his love for the music and just enthusiasm was when you'd be with him. There were a lot of things that I played with him over the past couple of years with my friends that coming into it I didn't really enjoy. For example, the Prof violin concerto that he played with the orchestra last year. When we first got the music and we began rehearsals, I dreaded coming in the days when I saw the email that we'd be working on that for an hour. And it just never really made sense to me. But eventually he started to come in and rehearse with us. And you could just look up, or you didn't even have to look up, you could just listen. And you could just feel that intensity that he played with, and just how enthusiastic he was. Every single note he played, how carefully planned out it all was. And by the end of the semester, it's one of my favorite violin concertos. Now I can't get enough of it. And that also goes for things that he taught in lessons. You know, there's a lot of typical pieces that he likes to teach, the Sinding Suite, the Conus Concerto, that coming in, you don't really think much of them, and you don't really understand why he's making you play this, but, you know, just watching him show you an example of, oh, this is how it's supposed to go. After months of practicing that with him, you just can't get it out of your head now, and it really, it sticks with you. And I know I said I wouldn't give any specific anecdotes that I couldn't think of one, but there was one thing that stood out. A couple months ago, I had a lesson with him, and I had been sick, or I wasn't feeling well. So there was something wrong. I was tired, and he could tell. He always could tell. He always knew if there was something wrong with your playing. He always listened. There was never a moment when he wasn't listening to you. And he could tell that I wasn't really giving it everything I had. And he stopped me, and he asked me what I was doing, and I was like, well, I'm not feeling very well today. And he said, well, no matter how you feel, and no matter what's going on with you, every time you put the bow on the string, you need to be focused, and you need to be thinking about the music, and you need to be a part of the music, no matter how you're feeling. And I realized that at that time, that's what was so infectious about the way that he played. That's what just gave off that feeling whenever you watch him play, that look in his eyes, that he's so immersed into the music, just so much into it. And I think I speak for the whole violin studio when I say that we are not going to forget that. And that we're always going to strive to achieve that same sense of poise, as he called it, and focused whenever we play. So, as we do that, he'll never be gone. So, thank you, everyone, and to all the other violinists. I'm sure I'll see you downstairs soon enough.
Thomas Otten, Richard's colleague, accompanist, not accompanist, politically incorrect. I remember when, remember when Tommy came, because I heard in New York all the time how excited Richard was to be able to play with Tommy. He'll share a few notes with us.
It's quite humbling to be here today, to be able to play in Richard's memory and his honor. And what everybody has shared seems to me to be so spot on, because Richard was an amazing person, musician, friend, and mentor. But above all else, Richard had the ability to see you, who you were as a musician, as a person, and to honor that so deeply. And it has been such a privilege to have been seen by Richard and to see him. That has truly touched me very deeply. And performing with him was challenging, yes, but also so life-affirming. I'll never forget doing the Prokofiev F minor sonata with him. It was one of the most amazing pieces ever written, and it was my first time playing it. He played it many times, but he allowed me the joy of discovering the piece with him. And that will be one of my great musical memories of all time. I will play a piece by Rachmaninoff. It's very dear to my heart. It's the Etude Tableau in C minor, Opus 33, number 3. It's a piece that I've played since my undergraduate days. And nobody knows how to mourn like the Russians. But what's wonderful, and this piece has a lot of that in it, but what's so wonderful to me is that there's a transformation that takes place. It moves from C minor into this transcendent C major. And the whole latter part of the piece is you're just bathed in C major. And I think Richard would very much appreciate a bath with C major.
professor of music at Duke to say a few words.
It is hard to speak in this situation. I think I'd rather play, but I'm not sure about that. I'm sorry Richard is not here. He would enjoy it in a way. Other people described the look on his face he would probably give in describing it. And it's hard because it would be easy to tease him because we all loved him, and there's a lot about Richard that we could tease, and we've done some of that. There's also some anger, the unfairness of his being taken away from us so young, and certainly sorrow for his family, Susan and Nick, and Ellen and Paul, and Bob. I actually was not in high school with Richard. I tell everybody I meet that I went to the same high school, but I make it clear that Richard, in fact, was about 3 years older than me, so we were not in Cass Tech at the same time. Richard was one of the gods to me. I would go to concerts at Cass when I was in middle school, and I would hear Richard play chamber music recitals. I went to a concert of the students of Misha Mishikov, Richard's teacher in Detroit. And to me, Richard was, I wondered if he spoke English. I wondered if he ate lunch. You know, he was at another level. And I suppose he's now at another level. The connection goes even longer, a generation back. My mother was in high school with Bob Luby, and also in college at Wayne State in Detroit. And Bob was a great athlete, a really great athlete, a track man and a football player. He scored a touchdown against Michigan State. I think the score of that game was 98-7. And my mother had a crush on Bob. And she would talk about that every time we talked about the Lubys. She would say, boy, that Bob Luby. Yes, I had a call from George Taylor last night. George was our violist at Duke until about 20 years ago, and he moved to Eastman School in Rochester. And George now plays on a series of concerts, early music series that Richard started when he was in Rochester as principal second in the orchestra there. I ran into Katerina Uda last night, who was is a Duke graduate student, and studied with Richard because of Richard's expertise in early music. And Katerina said what his students here said, how much he meant. She was fresh in North Carolina, which seems uncivilized to most of us, and to her. And Richard took her in hand and made her feel at home and welcome in her new situation. this stage when Richard auditioned for the job here at Carolina. I think they were between cellists at the time, so they had to call me, from Duke of all places. And so I came and spent, I think, most of a day. There were 3 violinists auditioning for the job, and I knew Richard, of course. Not, you know, as I said, he was a god, but by the time he auditioned here, he had come down to earth. So I played with the 3 violinists, and I think I certainly tried to play as well for all 3, but I might have given Richard a little advantage. But it really didn't matter because he was easily the choice of the committee and the other musicians who were playing. We played quartets. And just 2 weeks ago, we were on the stage. We played Shostakovich's trio together with Clara Yang. So I have a very recent memory of a great musical experience with Richard. And it was a piece he didn't know, but like his students said about the Prokofiev, and like Richard was with virtually all music. I remember how excited he was playing Alan Anderson's music and trio that we did. In other words, music from the earliest moments of violin to the present day. And so I'll conclude by saying I'm sorry he's gone, and he will live in our memories, certainly, but for me and for many musicians, also in our playing, because we've imbibed his spirit, his musicality, and it will be with us whenever we play music now, too.
Just a couple of words. First of all, thank you. Richard abjured any kind of fuss over him. Would not be his style. Yet it's fitting and deserved. And we're grateful. Thank you all for being here. Susan will be receiving, and Nick will be receiving visitors through the weekend in the afternoons. I ask after the Brahms is finished to just, we'll walk out quietly. Time does not bring relief. You all have lied who told me time would ease of my pain. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. I want him at the shrinking of the tide. The old snows melt from every mountainside, and last year's leaves are smoke in every lane. But last year's bitter loving must remain heaped on my heart, and my old thoughts abide. There are 100 places where I fear to go, so with his memory they brim, and entering with relief some quiet place where never fell his foot or shone his face, I say there is no memory of him here, and so stand stricken, so remembering him.
Thank you.